It was the last year, I think, of great Westerns. No one knew it was the last year. No one said, oh boy, this is the death knell of the Western.
Well, 1969 was a real pivotal year for the Western film genre. Just right in that year, you had major motion pictures, Westerns. All of them kind of tried to redefine who the cowboy was and what the Western film genre was and going in different directions.
So it's no mistake that suddenly we started getting different takes on the Western, different spins. Certainly, Butch Cassidy comes in on that level.
It obviously wasn't a traditional Western. It had a lot of the elements of a traditional Western, but it also had modern humor. So it was a nice mix.
Here are a couple of historical figures that through their actual exploits, you could see how the West was changing.
What the hell is that?
It's kind of like them versus civilization. And so I think William Goldman saw in them the kind of protagonist that he could take and mold into the story that he wanted to build in that Vietnam era.
The fact that it came out in '69, Vietnam was on strong, protesting, things were changing. And suddenly this hit a nerve and a funny bone at the same time.
From the second that I read it, I knew it was going to be a movie that everybody connected with could look back with some sense of pride.
There was probably a little fear that it was maybe either a little too clever or too much fun and games, but it was still extremely attractive script, very well written.
Bill decided he was going to reinvent what a Western could be, and he took figures that were real and very mythological, but put a very modern, almost postmodern spin on them.
I think we lost him. Do you think we lost him?
No.
Neither do I.
It had all the elements that other directors followed for years to come and still are in some ways.
I think they all really appreciated that this subject could be something special.
In the late 50s, I came across this story of these two guys. At that time, nobody knew the story. Nobody knew about Butch Cassidy or the Wild Bunch. It was an unknown piece of material. And what moved me so much about it was that they ran away. I'd never seen that before.
Hey, Butch! What? They're very good!
They ran away and became legends bigger a second time. And I thought, God, that's great material.
Split up!
That's what made the movie, I think, was its complete unconventionality. Whenever you expected something to turn left, it turned right.
How many of them are following us? All of them. All of them? What's the matter with those guys?
There had been different slants on Westerns before. Most of them had been failures because the traditional Western was something that you didn't really play around with.
If anybody doesn't know the story, there's a 27 or 28-minute sequence in the middle that's a chase, where the good guys are chasing Butch and Sundance, and finally they say, we're going to go to South America.
Kid, the next time I say let's go someplace like Bolivia, let's go someplace like Bolivia. Next time.
Well, today that's not uncommon material. Then it was ridiculous. I remember the one studio that was interested said they would buy it if I would have them not run to South America, but stand and fight the super posse in America. And I said, but they went to South America. He said, I don't care. All I know is the great line, John Wayne, don't run away. And John Wayne don't run away.
Bill probably made a bigger impact at that moment. He said, I think a Western can be anything we want it to be.
I was running the studio at the time, and producer Larry Terman had brought me the original Goldman script, and it was like 400 pages. It was a wonderful script. I said, Larry, I like this, but Bill's got to cut this back.
So we sent it out again, and every studio but one wanted it, and there was this wild bidding for it. I wrote the movie for Paul Newman as the Sundance Kid and Jack Lemmon as Butch Cassidy, because Jack Lemmon had done a movie called Cowboy, in which he was a tenderfoot, and I thought he would have been wonderful and funny, and Newman's a fabulous actor. And I had done a movie with Paul Newman called Harper. And the first draft of Butch I brought to him.
I knew secretly that Steve McQueen and Paul were very interested. And so I bought it right on the spot.
We were so taken with it that we exceeded our legal minimum in offering money for it.
Paid $400,000 for it, which was higher than any original screenplay had been purchased before, and was like $200,000 over my contractual rights with the board of directors. But I felt so strongly about it, I gave them $400,000 and thought I'll talk the board into this later at the next meeting.
It was news all over the country, if you were paying attention. Yeah, it's probably the only screenplay that ever made the regular news.
We jeopardized our jobs to buy it, and directed by George Roy Hill.
Hill was fabulous for it. Of all the directors I've worked with over the decades, Hill's the most gifted.
When George got Butch, he really got it by calling his agent and saying, "I've got to get a job." He had gotten fired off Hawaii, fired off Thoroughly Modern Millie.
George and Paul were very close. They were classmates. He wouldn't have been my first choice, but Bill Goldman was very friendly with him, and I believed in Bill and Paul.
George had a great eye for truth, and there wasn't any hesitation or indecision. He knew precisely what he wanted in a scene. He knew what he wanted from his actors.
Is that what you call giving cover?
Is that what you call running?
George Roy Hill was not really a Western director, but that was probably exactly right for Butch because it was a brand new thing. George Roy Hill's sort of freshness with the genre helped. You know, he was not embarrassed to have fun with it. Things that would have made a more purist Western director blanch, you know.
I'm not sure that George ever received his due that I think should have been given to him about what an incredible director he was. He was an incredible craftsman. He had control over everything. And I think he is the essential force behind that film.
What's your idea this time? Bolivia? What's Bolivia?
The thing I think director George Roy Hill did was he knew what he had. He knew what the strength was. He knew he was telling a story about these two characters and the triangle relationship with the girl. And he focused on that. Even though it's a big Western with a big landscape and lots of big scenes and everything, it's really a very intimate comedy drama, and it's told intimately.
Butch, do you ever wonder if I'd met you first, we'd been the ones to get involved?
Well, we are involved, Ella. Don't you know that? I mean, you are riding on my bicycle. In some Arabian countries, that's the same as being married.
It was going to be McQueen and Newman. It was a gigantic thing, and it didn't happen.
McQueen and Newman couldn't agree on billing.
There was the most ridiculous series of meetings. I had a globe, and we split the globe right in half. Half the prince would be McQueen, Newman. Half the world would be Newman, McQueen. I did everything conceivable because I had the two biggest stars in the world at that time.
And so McQueen was gone.
I mean, the casting stories on that are, you know, Brando was going to do it and then he disappeared. Warren Beatty was going to do it maybe.
They had meetings and they'd go through the list of other people, and George was very amusing about sitting in the meetings and everybody in these power positions saying, yes, you know, Brando or Beatty or a number of people, and come to George and he'd say, Redford.
He was, for me, I thought, the next Jack Lemmon. He was a brilliant, brilliant Broadway star and actor and comedian. I believe to this day it was Joanne Woodward who suggested Redford.
Joanne suggested it to me. The studio wanted some other actors, and George and I both wanted Redford.
He was a great friend of Bill Goldman, and Bill would call me once a day, and then he got Paul and George Roy Hill to call, and I was just besieged. I kept saying, look, I've seen him in Barefoot in the Park, and he's a college guy. I said, we're wrecking this piece. He's too clean cut. And I was totally wrong. And I've always admitted that as one of my great misjudgments.
I knew I could play the part. I mean, I was attracted to that part. I knew it, but nobody else did, because the business has got a shallow mind when it comes to using its imaginations for other things. So I was already being stereotyped.
Redford's a good actor. It's actor. Sometimes people get sort of stuck in, you know, they can't see you doing something else because they have some idea about that if you look this way, you can't do that or something.
I just had to sit for about 4 or 5 months waiting for the dust to settle. And what finally settled out was George and Goldman and Paul, and they formed, I guess, a kind of triumvirate that helped push it across. So I'm indebted to them.
I'll never forget the first day shooting when I saw Bob on a horse with his long hair and in the wardrobe and with the mustache and everything. I thought, how crazy could I have been? This guy was born on a horse. Bob was great.
George Roy Hill was there to glamorize Redford and Newman in a way that most Western actors had not been shot. It's a very unusual way that they're shot.
Heckney. There's a wonderful thing Hill did. When you meet the Sundance Kid, there's an amazingly long close-up of Redford's face. And Hill did that intentionally because he was saying to the audience, he's not going away, get used to him. Because in most big star Hollywood movies, when there were two, when the action happens, the hero stays and fights and the other guy goes to get coffee. And Hill wanted the audience to know that Redford was not going to go get coffee. And that was wonderful.
You haven't lost a hand since you got the deal. What's the secret of your success?
Prayer. I didn't know Redford before, but it seems to me as though we drank a lot of beer in Mexico. And we had a great deal of fun. I tussled him in a fencing contest, and we just had a great sense of fun off stage. Worked very hard during the daytime and had a lot of fun when it was finished.
Paul and I probably began a sort of bonding really the first few days. We found a common ground of humor and values off the set that could be worked into the work on the set. It was stripped away almost immediately, the age difference of, 12, 13 years between us. The professional notoriety difference that existed, that was stripped away pretty quick, but that was Paul that did that. He just accepted that we were colleagues working together as actors. And so I think that meant a lot to me. And then what happened just developed naturally between us. We never questioned it and still don't.
Hold it there. Well, just thought I'd watch.
Bring the kids, why don't you?
No one knew who Redford was. He had been in flops, and he'd have been in a couple of good comedies.
It's certainly kicked my career into a very, very, almost abnormally high gear.
I think it made a star out of Redford. He jumped from almost a star to star, and his price jumped accordingly. And incidentally, the script that I bought was called The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. Paul and Bob came in, and it was thought that Butch Cassidy, should be the first name and the Sundance Kid. So when this was presented to me, I said, God, I've lived with this so long, the Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, it just doesn't sound right, you know. But now you can never think of it sounding the other way around.
I think we give credit to Hill for his instinct of, hey, Newman had the reputation, Redford didn't. So there was something in George Roy Hill who said, I like this combo. And I think there is a kind of partnership, Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. I mean, whoever you're talking about as a duo on screen, sometimes that magic is there.
Ah, you're wasting your time. You can't track us over rock.
Tell them that.
It was lucky the way that this turned out. Those guys were almost meant to be playing opposite each other, like Tracy and Hepburn. Mostly been men and women. These two personalities played with the same kind of energy and passion and fun. as a man and a woman.
They're serious about their work, although they can have fun.
You're beginning to get on my nerves.
It's two movie stars working together. So these guys are selling their strengths that they brought to these roles. And, you know, Redford always had that, you know, that incredulous, handsome, but withdrawn, that stammer thing he does.
What are you doing? Stealing your woman?
Take her. Take her.
And Newman always had a comic side to him that was underused in movies. And they just put those things together in a way that worked. Those guys looked like they were having fun. You could look back at Butch Cassidy and wonder if the roles had been switched, would it have worked as well?
A few weeks before rehearsal, I thought I was playing Sundance. And when I said something to George about it, he says, "No, that's not the character you're playing Butch."
George had trouble getting Newman to do the role because when he first met Newman, he said, "No, you should be playing Butch." And Newman said, "George, you saw Rally Round the Flag, didn't you? I am a terrible comic actor." And George said, "But this isn't really a comedy. This is really a historical Western. And you don't have to worry about the comedy. That'll take care of it. You just play it real. You just be Butch."
Be thy day, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
What am I going to tell poor Mr. Harriman?
Well, I think I scaled the character a little high and a little broad. It's easier to take a character down than it is to bring him up. So I probably gave him too much, and he kept saying, "Squeeze it a little less." But working with George was always about as good as it gets.
There's a scene in the middle of the Super Posse chase where they go to see a sheriff to try and enlist and fight the Spanish in the Spanish-American War.
"I never met a soul more affable than you, but you're faster than the kid. But you're still nothing but two-bit outlaws on the dodge. It's over. Don't you get that? Your times is over, and you're gonna die bloody, and all you can do is choose where."
Newman was convinced that the scene with the sheriff is what should send them to South America. And Hill was convinced it wasn't enough. And every day, Newman would come in with new evidence to support his way.
Between Redford, Newman, and George Hill, they had a revolving, I don't know whether it was sort of outdoing each other or one-upping each other in some way or other.
All I remember is that Paul was just becoming so boring. He kept hounding George about this Bledsoe character, this Sheriff Bledsoe. Paul was being almost anal about the thing. This went on and on and on.
And Redford at one point suggested that we change the title of the movie to The Bledsoe Scene, because that was really what we talked about for hours, and they would argue.
George Ray Hill was set on fulfilling the entertainment value of the screenplay.
You know, Westerns are one of the most fun kind of movies to make. It's great. I would do a Western any day of the week. It was hot as the dickens, as I remember there. But you're, you know, playing this part. It's great. Edith Head did the costumes, you know, and so all of my stuff was made for me, and so it was beautiful and incredible looking.
You had the best locations imaginable, at least in my mind. You know, you had Zion National Park, you had Durango, Colorado. Incredible scenery, topography, varied, Western. You rode through that, it was a joy. Then Mexico. It was pretty blessed in terms of the environment that we were working in. Man, I just had a great time.
I knew his cameraman, Connie Hall, and it's my memory that after about 2 weeks of shooting, he turned to Connie Hall and said, "I'll stage it, you shoot it." And I didn't expect that from him, but he really knew that Connie Hall could have a different way visually of looking at a scene the way he may have conceived it.
So you have these incredibly great-looking people, a beautiful girl, and this magnificent landscape. Everything came together.
You sure this'll work? It'll work. Yeah, that's what you said about Sweetface. This'll work.
In that film, I wanted to do my own fast draw, and I wanted to ride, and I wanted to jump horses and, you know, do all that. There was one thing that Paul got upset about, what I now realized it was right. I told George I'll jump on the train myself and then scamper along the top of the train. Paul came on the set and he got really upset, and it threw me because I was enjoying it. I was enjoying that I could do it. And he said, look, I don't want any heroics around here. I said, well, it's not heroic. I'm just enjoying it. He said, I don't care if you're enjoying it or not. He said, I don't want to lose a co-star unnecessarily. He said, I'm committing to this film. And so it was kind of chastisement on Paul's part that when I thought about it later, I thought, well, yeah, of course, that made sense. Who was I to go out there and say, well, I want to do this, I want to do that? And if there had been some slip up, that would have been the end of maybe me in the film. So he was right. My youth got in the way.
You are mine at a place. Mine. You hear me? Mine. All mine.
I had written this sequence about a bicycle. Bicycles were the video games of that era. They were just the great fad. People went nuts in the West having bicycles. And I wrote this scene for Butch to take Etta on a ride. And I wrote it that they go through a ghost town, and you see them, and then you don't see them, then you see them in the next window and like that. And he'll like that, but that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to musicalize it. And then he got the notion, forget that, he wanted a song.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
He stuck it in the middle of the movie. Hello, in the middle of a Western, you've got a song? I mean, nobody remembers now how startling it was.
Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling.
When I saw the film, I thought it was doomed because they had this, what I thought was a dumb song in the middle of it. You know, I said, what is that doing there? Raindrops keep falling on my head. What is... I thought, this is the craziest thing. And I said, what are you doing, John? That's... For me, it kind of killed the movie. Well, how wrong can you be?
But there's one thing I know.
Music is an important feature of this particular movie. George had a musical background, and I think that may have helped a great deal. You know, it's a little paragraph in the script, you know, this is a musical interlude. It was created not on the page, but filmically. And I think that probably George had some vision in mind when he was designing these shots and figuring out what the bicycle ride really was.
There's a kind of pleasant looniness to it. Of course, that scene is also so critical. You can say it's a musical break from everything else. It's much more than that. It really is at the heart of who Butch is. He's a clown. He is a trickster. He's enjoying showing off.
Burt Bacharach wrote a brilliant song. It had nothing to do with the picture story-wise, but it did relationship-wise and style-wise. It was perfect. Audiences loved that. They didn't go out to get popcorn when that came on.
I guess that was the biggest challenge I had, to write music that didn't sound like real old-fashioned, but it sounded like it fit in that period. Damn, if I just didn't keep hearing words. And I heard the melody. Probably meant nothing to me at the time as far as what raindrops keep falling on my head means to the Paul Newman character. But in a way, it's kind of subliminally right. These guys' raindrops keep falling on my head. You know. So even though Hal David, who wrote the song, wrote the lyrics eventually, tried all kinds of different titles, all kinds of different lyrics, we wound up with Raindrops. It just felt right. It felt right musically, and it made sense. I do have to say that my compliments to George for taking the chance, taking the risk, seeing, yeah. The safer way would have been no song.
The first sneak, B.J. Thomas's people were horrified because they said B.J. really hurt himself with this one. It was, I think, the big hit of his career.
I've been working like a dog all my life, and I can't get a penny ahead.
Sundance says it's because you're a soft touch and always taking expensive vacations and buying drinks for everyone, and you're a rotten gambler.
Well, that might have something to do with it.
George would like to point out, you know, I don't like to underscore my scenes. I don't like to have to rely on music to get across emotion, and tickled him. He didn't do it consciously some time after, maybe years after, but I remember him saying, yeah, they were complaining about so much music, and I went back and I counted the minutes, and we've only got 13 minutes of music in our 2-hour movie. And that's not very much music as movies go.
They said you were dead.
Don't make a big thing out of it. No, make a big thing out of it.
I think economy in music is very special. And I could really relate to that when George said, I don't want music wall to wall. I don't want a lot of music. I want just a little music. I want where the music is in, I want it really to be important.
It came to the point where we finally finished the film. And so they took it up to San Francisco. And the movie started with 450 people in the San Francisco theater, the first premiere, and the movie starts and the clattering. There was a little giggling in the audience about the silent movie. And I don't know what it is in that silent movie that got the first laugh, but it did. And they started killing people, and the people were laughing at that. And they were chuckling all the way through this movie. I mean, the roof came down when he kicked him in the balls. I really wondering about earthquake in the theater. It was so big and didn't die down. And will they hear what happens next, you know?
The thing that terrified us was it too funny?
At the end, there was gigantic applause. And it just was perfect.
The lights came up, and it was radiating from the executive ranks. David Brown and Zanuck were gleeful. I know everybody, except for this little gloom among them, George. And as they were walking out, and George nodding, yeah, they liked it and all that, he said, but they laughed at my tragedy. We've got to do something about it. They don't get the ending of this movie. This is wrong.
I talked to Hill, I guess the next morning, and he was in despair. And he said, it's too funny. We've got to do something about it. So we set about consciously taking out laughs.
Reloading. That's all I got.
That we got terrible reviews. I remember the New Yorker called us the bottom of the pit. We didn't get one rave.
George was extremely depressed about the reviews. Then miraculously, the film just on its own, word of mouth, built and built and built, and then it went kind of soared, and it became something else.
Nobody knew it was going to be what it became, which was, I guess, the most popular Western ever and one of the most popular movies at that time ever.
It's a harder sales job on critics. I mean, the movie has to really overwhelm them for them to go screaming into the streets, you got to see this movie. So they're looking at a movie, and here comes a movie that's different. They thought it was diminishing the genre that they loved, and so it was a harder sell for them.
Well, they didn't get it. Audiences got it because the business was great, and I sat in on too many screenings with real people where they just ate it up.
Butch has no rough edges. You know, it's polished, it's honed, and it's kind of burnished in a way that made people feel good about going back to that genre, feeling comfortable with two gigantic movie stars who separately had huge followings.
We showed the movie to the United States Supreme Court in Washington. And one of the elderly justices, I don't recall which one, he said, you know, I think I had those boys up in my court.
I saw it in a New York theater, and there was a standing ovation. The audience was with it. And you don't pay people to do that. And then the word gets out. So it was absolutely word of mouth.
Follow our path. Dead on it. I couldn't do that. Could you do that? How can they do that? Who are those guys?
Audiences went and they just reacted to the actors. They reacted to the character and the stories, and they had a great time. And then word of mouth took over. You know, I think critics go back and take another look sometimes and find out that maybe they should have watched the movie with their heart instead of their heads.
I don't think it had much effect on other films. At least I'm not aware of it. But then I'm not a film historian either, so.
Westerns sort of went out of fashion. This was like the last of the Mohicans or something. So I don't think it changed anything about Westerns. It's just generally felt that Westerns are too expensive and nobody wants to see them. But all it takes is a good one.
You're joking me! You can't swim!
I'm telling you, Butch, if I drown, I swear to God, I'll kill you.
I think it was probably one of the first of the buddy films. As I remember, Goldman was very influenced by Gunga Din, about male bonding, male friendships. And so that really came from Bill. It fit nicely for Paul and I because it just so happened that we were kind of like the two characters. Our sensibility and our sensitivities were similar.
The thing to remember when
Don't tell me how to rob a bank. I know how to rob a bank.
Boy, a few dark clouds appear on your horizon, you just go all to pieces, don't you?
Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid was like the ultimate buddy movie, so it happened to be set in a Western. I mean, they'd love to be able to create two characters that fit together as well as Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid did. And, you know, I pretty much the model for the modern buddy movie, I think.
Don't! Give me a hand over here.
Who am I, Smith or Jones? Live.
The upshot was dozens, maybe hundreds of movies that tried to capture that same spirit.
It started a wave of buddy pictures, The Sting being one of them, with the same two guys. And incidentally, I'm trying to put those two guys together still to this day. They've been threatening to do it again in some other genre, in an old folks' home. No, I'm just kidding.
I know they approached us about doing a sequel, which we didn't want any part of. I said, how do you do a sequel? You know, well, they ended up doing a prequel.
It's not an accident that Callie Curry, who wrote Thelma and Louise, said, yes, I am winking to Butch Cassidy. This is the female Butch Cassidy in some ways. Instead of the happy Western ending, we've got what happens to them, which is not the Bolivian army destroying them, as in Butch Cassidy, but it is they have chosen a death.
There's the great line of Scott Fitzgerald, there are no second acts in American lives. And here are two guys who went to a place where they didn't know the language and had a phenomenal second act. I mean, why did they do that? No one else did that. It wasn't there was a Western convention of outlaws down in Bolivia. It was just this nutty thing that Butch did, and Sundance went along with him. And how often have you seen two guys like that? This affable goof who everybody adores, and this lethal killer. And they were together forever.
Couldn't top it. Couldn't top Butch Cassidy, no. I haven't done that many films. I say it's like going out with a great girl. Very hard act to follow.
Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, is known by many people as a really nice, whimsical, revisionist Western film, but perhaps the most entertaining Western film ever made, in one regard, because it was a skillful blending of humor, action, gorgeous cinematography, and lovely music.
Bill's tone of the movie is what lasts. Slightly postmodern before anyone was talking about postmodern, where you're aware of the genre while you're in the genre. That stayed with us.
Future's all yours, you lousy bicycles.
It was original, it was funny, it was poignant. The scenes were marvelously designed. Relationships seemed to work. It had a lot of different colors in it.
Working with Paul was terrific. It was a very enjoyable experience. It was fun. Probably the most fun I've ever had on a film.
The thing that first appealed to me about it was I'd never read that story before, and I think that's what still appeals to me. It's a wonderful story. And I would bet you, everybody you know, every movie they really love, what they really love about it is the story.
I got a great idea where we should go next. I don't want to hear it. Change your mind when I tell you. Shut up.